I was born in Jeddah, where the air tastes like salt and prayer. My father owned a tiny shop off the old port, where coral walls crumbled slower than time. He sold framed calligraphy, incense burners, and small artifacts that families brought in from forgotten corners of their homes. He never called them antiques. He said they were fragments of patience. When I was a child, I would sit behind the counter and watch him polish a chipped bowl until the surface caught light like forgiveness. His fingers moved carefully, almost reverently, as if the object might be listening. A thing, he told me, is not just what it is, it's what it remembers. That sentence rooted itself deep in me, maybe too deep. I studied conservation because it sounded like devotion made practical. I wanted to protect what others threw away. At the university in Riyadh, I learned how to thicken old ink with modern stabilizers, how to clean silver without erasing its story, how to write reports that made decay sound almost noble. The professors spoke of preservation like prayer. I believed them. When I got my first job at a museum, I thought I had found a kind of temple. White walls, silence, gloves. The first artifact they gave me was a 14th century Quranic folio eaten through by worms. I worked through the night, patching centuries with patience, whispering the verses under my breath, like a child trying not to wake God. People brought me objects wrapped in cotton cloth, family heirlooms, mosque lamps, manuscripts kept under beds. I unwrapped them slowly, as if unveiling a wound. They would watch my hands, anxious, waiting to see if I judged them. I never did. I told them what could be saved in what was already gone. They trusted me because I spoke softly, because I cared. But pride grows quietly, like mold, invisible until the surface changes color. One day, a man came with a folder. Not an artifact, just photos. Old relics from a private collection somewhere near Taif, he said. The ownership papers were missing. War, displacement, bureaucracy, who knows? We need a conservation report, he told me. You don't have to authenticate, just describe condition. He spoke like a man who had rehearsed the sentence. I told myself it wasn't a lie. I was merely describing what I could see. Pigment fade, parchment warp, minor abrasion. I added a careful note, provenance ongoing. That phrase would become my favorite prayer later. It sounded official enough to silence my doubts. When the report was published, I received my first real praise from someone who mattered, a Western curator visiting from London. She said my work was sensitive, that I understood the soul of material. Her words wrapped around my pride like gold thread. I told myself it was merit, not flattery. A few months later, she asked if I could privately assess a collection about to be auctioned in Paris. Nothing illegal, she assured me, just delicate. She said that word, delicate, like it excused everything. The museum couldn't afford me a ticket, but she offered one. First class. I had never flown first class before. I told myself I was representing my country, the young conservator from Jeddah, bringing our heritage to the world. I wore my best suit, bought new cufflinks, and watched my reflection in the airplane window all the way to Paris. When I arrived, I was taken to a private gallery filled with relics older than some nations. The air smelled of dust, oil paint, and arrogance. A marble statue with no arms stood in the corner like a witness. The curator smiled. "You see," she said, "these pieces will be preserved properly now. Western storage, controlled humidity, historical respect." I nodded, even though something inside me recoiled. But pride had already changed its shape. It no longer looked like care. It looked like permission. The first payment arrived in an envelope marked Consultancy Honorarium. My name was printed in English, bold, clean. I placed the envelope on my father's old counter that night, the same counter where he once polished relics by hand. The money smelled like paper and dust, the same scent as the manuscripts I used to save. I didn't open it right away. I wanted to believe it was still holy somehow, that my work was still part of memory, not its betrayal. But when I finally tore it open, I didn't pray. I just counted. And that was how it began. Not with a theft, not with a sin, but with a description. Just a few neat lines about pigment and parchment. I thought I was serving history. I didn't realize I was already selling it. They say every desert has its mirage, and mine began with a curator's smile.
After Paris, the invitations multiplied. Geneva, London, New York, every gallery, every private collector seemed to know my name. They called me the bridge between civilizations. I told myself that was noble, a man preserving his people's past, introducing it to the world. That's what I said in interviews, at dinners, in conference halls that smelled of glass and white wine. Inside, I knew it was something smaller, more private. I wanted to be seen. I grew up in a country that worships modesty, where the most sacred things stay buried, under sand, under silence. But in the West, people looked at me like I was rare. Every time I spoke about ancient Hejaz manuscripts or Nabatean carvings, they listened like pilgrims. Their eyes told me I was valuable. And I began to trade in that feeling. The work shifted, quietly at first. A collector in Dubai introduced me to a man who could source items from abandoned archaeological sites. Salvaged, he called them. The word was soft, like mercy. He showed me photographs, a clay tablet still half buried in dust, a bronze incense stand resting on cracked soil. They'll be destroyed by the elements, he said. Better to move them now. I nodded. That's how the first shipment began. The crates came sealed in plain wood marked with false restoration labels. Inside were relics that once stood in mosques, shrines, even tombs. I told myself I was saving them, from humidity, from time, from ignorance. When I signed the export documents, I felt like a surgeon cutting to heal. The payments came fast, clean, discreet. Transfers to offshore accounts, consulting fees, authenticity bonuses. Every zero in my balance made the desert inside me quieter. But money has a sound. It whispers louder than prayer. Soon I learned the rhythms of the trade, which customs officers looked away, which dealers used poetic invoices, which auction houses cleaned provenance like laundering linen. I never touched the sand anymore. I sent men with cameras. I watched their footage from my apartment in Jeddah, the relics glowing under flashlights, the silence of the dunes replaced by the clicking of lenses. There was one piece that haunted me, a sandstone carving of a verse fragment still half buried in a ruined well. Its edges were worn smooth by centuries of wind. I wanted to see it in person. Against my better sense, I went. The night was windless. The desert was not quiet. It breathed. Every dune seemed alive, moving slowly, whispering. When we lifted the relic, I heard something, a faint hum, like a prayer under the surface. I told myself it was the wind. We wrapped it and left before dawn. I didn't pray that morning. The next months were a blur of exhibitions and transactions. I learned to speak the language of luxury, preservation, heritage transfer, private stewardship, words that made theft sound virtuous. The Western buyers adored the vocabulary. It allowed them to feel righteous while buying holiness. At one London dinner, a wealthy donor asked me, "How does it feel to bring your culture to the world?" I smiled and said, "It's not my culture anymore. It belongs to whoever listens." They applauded. I drank. In that applause, something inside me twisted. I thought of my father, polishing broken bowls for neighbors who couldn't pay. He used to whisper verses while working, his lips moving silently. I realized I hadn't whispered anything in years. I had begun selling silence.
Then came the Louvre exhibit. They wanted a curated display of sacred Arabian artifacts, and I knew just the people to call. Within weeks, the crates arrived, relics smuggled from remote sites, some even from still-standing mosques. I told myself it was history, not faith. That distinction became my shield. One of the pieces was a small sandstone tablet, the same one I'd pulled from the desert myself. The Louvre lighting made it glow like fire. On the label, under provenance, they wrote, "Private Hejaz Collection, 19th Century." I stared at that line for a long time. It was beautiful in its precision, cruel in its lie. During the exhibit opening, journalists asked for interviews. They wanted to know how I felt seeing my country's history on the global stage. I said the words they wanted to hear. But as cameras flashed, I saw the tablet's shadow, long, sharp, cutting across the floor like a wound. When the applause faded, I couldn't hear anything. Not the crowd, not my own breath, just that faint hum again, the one from the desert. After that, the business deepened. I became a name whispered in corridors, the man who could move the unmovable. I told myself I wasn't stealing. I was translating. I wasn't desecrating. I was recontextualizing. It's astonishing how language can dress a sin. My apartment filled with gifts. Antique pens, Swiss watches, bottles of wine wrapped in gold foil I never opened. My phone buzzed constantly. Dealers, buyers, museums. Everyone wanted something sacred, something forbidden, something authentic. They said authenticity was priceless. I proved them wrong every week. Sometimes I'd open a crate alone late at night. I'd peel back the wrapping and trace the carvings with my fingers. I imagined the people who made them, men who knelt, who sang, who believed the stones would outlast their bodies. And here I was, selling their eternity by weight. Still, I kept going. Pride had hardened into justification. Every time I felt doubt, I told myself the same thing. If I didn't sell them, someone else would. That sentence became my second prayer. The first warning came in the form of a letter. No sender, just a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside, a printed photograph of one of the relics, the sandstone tablet. Across the image, in Arabic, someone had written, "Return it to the earth." I laughed at first. Probably an activist, I thought. Maybe a jealous rival. I tore the photo in half and threw it away. That night, I dreamed of dunes moving like waves, swallowing cities whole. When I woke up, there was sand on my floor. Just a trace, fine and golden. I told myself it was from my shoes, but I hadn't been outside in days. The next week, the Louvre curator, the one who'd organized the exhibit, was found dead in her apartment. Heart attack, they said. I told myself it was coincidence, but when I looked at the news photo, I saw behind her the same relic, displayed in her living room, the sandstone tablet, and I remembered the hum again. I stopped sleeping. I began to hear it everywhere, a low sound like breathing through dust. When I walked past crates in storage, I thought I heard my name in the echo. Once, I even pressed my ear to one just to be sure. The wood was warm. I started to lose track of time. I'd wake up surrounded by invoices, reports, museum catalogs. I couldn't remember writing half of them. My assistant said I was working too much. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was just running from something that finally learned to run faster. I went back to the desert, alone this time. I told myself I needed to check a site. Truth is, I needed to hear the wind again, to see if it still sounded like the hum. It did. I walked for hours until I found the spot where we had lifted the tablet. The sand had shifted, burying everything. I stood there, sweating under the sun, the silence pressing into me. For the first time in years, I felt small again, like the boy who watched his father polish relics in the pork shop. I dropped to my knees and pressed my palms into the sand. It was hot, almost burning. I whispered, "Forgive me," though I didn't know who I was speaking to. God, the dead, or the dunes. The wind rose suddenly. I swear I heard my father's voice. A thing is not only what it is, but what it remembers. I realized then I had turned every relic into a witness, and witnesses remember. When I returned to Jeddah, I tried to stop. I cut off the middlemen, ignored messages, refused meetings. But money doesn't vanish, it calls. Threats came from collectors, from smugglers. I had built a machine, and machines don't forgive their makers. I kept one relic, the smallest, a bronze pendant engraved with a verse. I placed it on my table every night like a silent jury. Its reflection in the glass reminded me of who I used to be, but it also reminded me of what I'd buried. That's when I decided, one final act, one final attempt at silence. I would take everything left in my possession and return it to the desert. Maybe the dunes would remember mercy. I don't remember the exact moment I crossed the line. Maybe it was the night I signed a contract under another name, or the night I toasted a sail with champagne I didn't drink. Maybe it was earlier, the first time I called a relic inventory. By then, I had grown fluent in deceit. I spoke 2 languages in one tongue, the language of faith for the public and the language of numbers for the private. Every handshake was a transaction, every prayer a pause between shipments. The city I once loved had turned into a marketplace of ghosts. The smuggling routes were clean, precise, invisible. We used diplomatic containers labeled restoration materials, moved them through consulates, chartered flights, free ports. Everything looked official, sealed in legal ink. That was the trick. Corruption doesn't hide in shadows. It hides in light, too bright to look at. My contacts called me Al-Muhafiz, the keeper. The name made me feel powerful, almost righteous. I told myself I wasn't stealing, I was saving. Each artifact I moved was, in my mind, a soul rescued from decay. But every rescue came with a price. There was a night in Dubai, one I try not to remember. A private auction at the top of a skyscraper, glass walls reflecting the city like a mirage of gold and sin. The guests were billionaires and art brokers. The air smelled of oud and whiskey. On the display tables, relics still carrying the dust of tombs. The buyers circled them like wolves, bidding in whispers. When I saw the numbers rising, I stopped thinking of faith, of heritage. I thought of weight, value, margin. Each gesture, each nod felt like confession inverted. I wasn't offering truth. I was selling reverence. After the final lot, a man from New York raised his glass to me. "You've brought the desert into civilization," he said. I laughed. I didn't tell him civilization was what destroyed it. That night, I slept with a stranger. I don't remember her name, only that she wore a pendant shaped like a crescent moon, and when she leaned close, I caught the faint scent of my father's workshop. Lemon oil, oud, patience. For a moment, I almost broke. Then I kissed her harder, as if silence could be erased by heat. The years blurred. The more money I made, the less I understood what it meant to keep it. I bought an apartment in Geneva, one in Istanbul, and one by the Red Sea I never visited. My life turned into a sequence of codes, shipment IDs, transfer confirmations, auction schedules. I surrounded myself with beauty to hide the rot. Bronze idols from Yemen on my shelves, marble fragments from Palmyra in my hallway, fragments of verses displayed under soft lights. People who visited called it a sanctuary. I called it inventory. But sometimes, at night, I'd wake and swear the relics were whispering. Not words, just movement, breath. The air would thicken with dust, even though the windows were sealed. Once I found sand grains on the glass table where no one had been. The same color as that well. That same hum. At a collector's dinner in Paris, someone joked that I had more history in my living room than the National Museum. I smiled, but my chest tightened. I realized I'd become the thing I used to despise, the Western gaze turned inward. A man owning his ancestors instead of honoring them. I excused myself, went to the restroom, and stared at my reflection under the fluorescent light. The face looking back was not mine. It was tired, hollow, polished like the relics I'd touched. My beard was trimmed, my suit perfect, but my eyes looked like broken glass. I whispered my father's line. A thing is not only what it is, but what it remembers. And for the first time, I understood. I was no longer a man. I was a relic, too. Preserved, but empty. The work grew faster, darker. The smugglers began using violence, digging under active sites, bribing guards, threatening families who refused to sell. When I objected, they reminded me of my accounts, of my name, of my complicity. "You're in this as deep as we are," one said. "You just wear gloves." He was right. I began to drink. Quietly. Secretly. The irony wasn't lost on me. The boy who grew up memorizing verses was now numbing himself with the same poison he used to condemn in others. But guilt is heavy. You need something to drown it in. There was one night, Riyadh, late summer, when I received a call. A convoy had been stopped near Tabuk. 3 men arrested, 1 shot. They were moving relics tied to my paperwork. The customs records listed my consultancy ID. I remember the silence that followed. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The inevitable catching up. I deleted everything that night. Emails, invoices, numbers, even photos. But erasing data doesn't erase memory. The files remained inside me, replaying like a slow confession. For days I didn't leave my apartment. The TV spoke in half-truths, cultural misappropriation, illicit trade, ongoing investigation. No one mentioned my name, but I heard it anyway, in every pause, every headline. When the phone rang, I didn't answer. The desert came back to me in dreams, louder, closer, crueler. I saw the well again, but this time the tablet was missing. In its place, a mirror. When I leaned over it, I saw my reflection dissolve into sand. I woke drenched in sweat, the air thick with heat that wasn't real. In the corner of the room, I thought I saw a shape, small, motionless, made of dust. When I turned on the light, it was gone. But the sand was there, again, scattered like evidence. The dealers stopped calling. The collectors grew cautious. Then, one by one, they vanished, arrested, deported, disappeared. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt naked. Without the noise, without the movement, all that was left was the hum. I tried to pray again, but the words stuck. My tongue felt foreign, my chest hollow. Faith had become a relic too, one I had sold long ago. One evening I sat at my desk surrounded by what remained. A bronze idol, a cracked ceramic bowl, a single page of illuminated calligraphy, a verse about mercy. I read it again and again, but the letters blurred, melted into the paper. I touched them and the ink smudged onto my skin like blood. I realized then, everything I'd touched had begun to touch me back. The relics didn't need vengeance. They only needed memory. And memory, when awakened, never lets go. That night I opened the last shipment crate, the one marked Private, Geneva. Inside, wrapped in linen, was the sandstone tablet, the same one that began everything. I didn't remember approving its transfer, yet there it was, whole, waiting. The hum grew louder, almost a voice now, breath against my ear. It said nothing I could translate, but I understood the message anyway. Return it. I packed the tablet carefully, loaded it into my truck, and drove toward the desert until the lights of the city disappeared behind me. When I stopped, the air was warm, silent, endless. The dunes moved faintly, like sleeping lungs. I placed the relic back into the sand, knelt beside it, and whispered the verse my father loved most, the one about forgiveness. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the wind shifted, and for the first time in years, I felt small enough to belong again. After I buried the relic, I thought I would feel clean. But the desert never forgets who disturbs it. For days I waited for peace. Instead, I woke to silence so heavy it pressed on my chest like a weight. No messages, no calls, no buyers. The world that once demanded me had vanished, leaving only the sound of my breath, shallow, uncertain. I stopped checking the news. Every headline felt like an accusation written in invisible ink. I knew they were closing in. Not the police, not yet, but the rumor, the scent. Reputation decays faster than parchment. I told myself I didn't care, but then why couldn't I sleep? My apartment became a museum of ghosts. Every object was a reminder, a wound. The bronze idol by the window caught the light like an open eye. The cracked bowl on my desk seemed to lean toward me, listening. I covered them with cloth, but even under the fabric I could feel their presence. I tried to sell what remained, but no one wanted my name attached anymore. One night I poured water over the bronze idol, hoping to wash off the feeling. The metal hissed, steam rose. The smell of it, hot, bitter, ancient, made me gag. I threw it in the trash chute, then emptied the chute again, afraid someone might find it and trace it back. Every act of hiding became its own confession. My sleep fractured into pieces. Dreams turned into interrogations. In one, I stood before a crowd of faceless people. Each held an artifact, and each one asked, "Who gave you the right?" In another, I saw my father standing by the sea, polishing an invisible bowl. When I called to him, he turned. His eyes were filled with sand. I began to talk to the walls, to the relics, to the air. I said, "I meant to preserve you." I said, "It wasn't greed." It was pride, I said. I didn't know the difference. None of them answered, but the hum was always there, steady, patient, merciless. When the investigators finally came, they were polite. Two men in plain clothes, voices low, shoes clean. They asked about a missing consignment of antiquities, linked to my export license. I offered them coffee. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I lied with the same calm I once used to authenticate a relic. After they left, I watched their car disappear down the street. I knew this was only the first visit. That night I opened every drawer, every envelope, every file. I burned what I could. The smoke filled the room with the smell of ink and ash, the smell of truth dying. I opened the windows, but the air didn't move. For the first time in my life, I envied the relics. They at least had permanence. My body began to betray me. Food tasted of metal. Water felt heavy. I could hear my heartbeat like a drum buried under sand. One morning I caught my reflection and barely recognized it. My eyes had sunk into shadows, my skin pale as limestone. I looked like the statues I used to clean, preserved, hollow. I went to the mosque thinking maybe prayer would help, but when I bowed I felt nothing, no gravity, no grace, just a vast absence pressing down. I realized I had traded faith for proof, and proof never comforts. The news broke soon after. Saudi art dealer under investigation for heritage smuggling. They didn't print my name, but they printed my initials. Anyone who knew me would understand. I turned off my phone. Friends stopped answering. Colleagues deleted our old photos. Even my family avoided my calls. My mother left a message, a single line. "You've shamed your father's memory." I didn't listen to the rest. When I finally went outside, the streets looked different. The air felt heavier, like the city itself was holding its breath. I wandered through the old port, the place where my father once worked. The shop was gone, replaced by a cafe selling imported coffee. I stood there for a long time, watching strangers sit where he once repaired relics. They sipped lattes and took photos of the walls he built by hand. I wanted to tell them about him, about the man who believed memory could be cleaned. But I stayed silent. I was no longer part of that story. The investigation deepened. They seized accounts, questioned partners. The smugglers vanished. One was found dead near the border. I knew what that meant. Loose ends. I waited for them to come for me. Every car that slowed outside made my pulse jump. Every knock on the door felt like a verdict. I began sleeping in the storage unit where I kept my crates, surrounded by what was left of the past. I thought maybe the relics would protect me, but in the dark they seemed to whisper louder, accusing, almost chanting. One night, I woke to find sand scattered across the floor again. Not just a trace this time, but enough to leave footprints. I followed them to the door. They stopped there, facing out, as if whatever had come in had decided to leave again. The next morning, I packed everything I owned. Not the relics, not the wealth, just clothes, documents, and a small bronze pendant. I drove into the desert again, farther this time. I didn't have a plan, I just wanted distance, from cities, from voices, from myself. The heat was unbearable. By afternoon, I had run out of water. By dusk, I had stopped caring. When the sun dropped, the desert turned silver, cold, endless. I lay on the sand and closed my eyes. The hum was there again, closer now, like something breathing beneath me. I whispered, "I'm sorry." The sound swallowed it whole. I woke at dawn, half buried in sand. My truck was gone. The wind had covered its tracks. For a moment, I thought I had died, that the hum was the sound of whatever waited beyond. But no, I was still here, still cursed with memory. I walked until my legs failed, until the sun burned everything clean. When I fell, I saw the horizon blur, the dunes trembling like waves. In the distance, I thought I saw a figure, a man, or maybe a mirage. He was holding something, a bowl glowing softly in the light. My father, or what was left of him. He said nothing, just raised the bowl to the wind. The sand rose around us like smoke. When I woke again, I was alone. My clothes were covered in dust, my hands shaking. Inside my pocket, the bronze pendant had cracked clean down the middle. I drove back to the city that night. I don't remember how. When I reached home, I sat in the dark, listening. No hum now, only silence. But silence, I learned, is just the echo of guilt when it runs out of breath. I knew the collapse was complete. Not dramatic, not divine, just slow, irreversible erosion. Like wind carving stone until the words disappear. I had once believed I could preserve the past. Now I was part of its ruin. The silence didn't kill me. It remade me. For weeks I wandered through it like a ghost inside my own skin, neither hunted nor free, just unfinished. The phone stopped ringing. The emails vanished, and the men who once praised me began avoiding eye contact, even in memory. In the emptiness, my sins finally had space to speak. At first, they whispered. Names, places, objects. Then they began to speak in full sentences. You gave us to strangers, they said. You sold us to people who wanted stories, not truth. I didn't argue. I just listened. I moved back into my father's old house. It was small, half forgotten, the kind of place where dust becomes another layer of time. The shop below had long closed. The air still carried a faint trace of lemon oil and incense, the scent of before. One evening, I found his old polishing cloth folded neatly in a drawer. The edges were frayed, but the center still smelled of patience. I held it to my face and felt something unclench. He used to say, if you clean long enough, even the light changes. I finally understood. He wasn't talking about objects. He was talking about the soul. Days passed without direction. I ate little, spoke less. My world shrank to the sound of prayer outside and the creak of the old wooden floor. Sometimes I thought about turning myself in. Not out of courage, but exhaustion. But there was something worse than prison. Being forgiven too easily. I didn't want release. I wanted to remember. So I stayed here, in this quiet exile, cataloging every sin the way I once cataloged relics. The first entry, I mistook reverence for ownership. The second, I called greed preservation. The third, I forgot what my father taught me, that memory is sacred, not profitable. By the 10th, I realized there was no end. Each wrong led to another, buried like strata of sand, endless, patient, heavy. One night, I dreamt I was back in the Louvre Hall. The sandstone tablet was missing again, replaced by a mirror. When I looked into it, I didn't see my face. I saw every relic I had ever sold, arranged in a circle, glowing faintly, like waiting witnesses. Each whispered something I couldn't translate, but their tone was not anger. It was disappointment. When I woke, the muezzin was calling for dawn prayer. I went to the sink, washed my hands, my face, my mouth. I looked at the water spiraling down the drain and whispered, I remember. For the first time, I felt the weight begin to lift. Not vanish, but shift, like a wound beginning to close from the inside. I started to write again, not reports or invoices, but letters, one for every relic I had betrayed, some addressed to museums, some to the desert itself. I took you, I wrote, from the silence that raised you. I spoke for you when I should have listened. I thought my name would protect you, but my name is dust now, and you are eternal. I didn't send the letters. I folded them, placed each inside a clay jar, and buried them behind the house. It wasn't redemption. It was inventory. This time, I was recording loss, not profit. People sometimes ask why sinners confess. They think it's to seek forgiveness, but confession isn't about forgiveness. It's about weight. Carrying something too long changes your shape. Speaking it aloud, even if no one listens, lets the bones shift back into place. I still hear the hum sometimes, especially when the wind rises. But it no longer frightens me. I think it was never a curse, only memory asking to be acknowledged. The desert never wanted to punish me. It wanted me to return what wasn't mine. And when I finally did, it went silent again. Last week, I visited the dunes one final time. I found the place by instinct, the same horizon line, the same pale light that blurs distance into eternity. I brought nothing but the pendant, cracked in two. I knelt and pressed both halves into the sand. "I'm not asking you to forget me," I whispered, "only to stop remembering me this way." The wind rose, warm and steady, smoothing my footprints almost as soon as I made them. I closed my eyes and thought of my father's workshop, the sound of his cloth circling a bowl, the slow rhythm of care. Maybe that's what redemption really is, the patience to polish what time has blackened, even when you know the shine won't last. Morning arrives like a soft verdict. I open the shutters of my father's house and let the light enter first. The room smells of wood and old smoke. The floor holds tiny crescents of dust I missed last night. I don't rush to clean them. Not everything needs to shine at once. I have work that isn't for money anymore. I repair what is still within reach. The neighborhood children discovered me weeks ago. They come with family Qurans wrapped in cloth, wedding bowls with hairline cracks, incense burners that don't stand straight. I tell them I'm no longer a conservator. They laugh and say, "You're the man who fixes memory." They don't ask for paperwork. They don't care about my name in the news. They only care if the smoke rises again, if the bowl holds water, if the old book can be read without losing letters to the edges. I charge small amounts and sometimes nothing. I write no invoices. I keep a ledger anyway, just dates, initials, the object, and a single line, returned to use. It feels right to record the living and let the dead keep their own books. Some nights, I read the letters I wrote and buried in clay jars. I don't dig them up. I sit on the back step and listen, as if paper can speak through earth. It can't, but silence can grow a backbone. The investigation continues somewhere beyond my door. I gave a statement. I surrendered the keys to 2 storage spaces and a Freeport locker in a country I may never see again. The men who questioned me were neither cruel nor kind. They were tired. One of them asked why I did it. I said, "Because I could." He nodded, as if he'd heard the line before. I am not absolved. I am not condemned. I live in the long corridor between. On Fridays, I walk to the cemetery where my father is buried. I bring a small brush. It is an old habit. Clean the stone, dust the letters, wipe the corner where wind collects. I speak to him without restraint now. I tell him about mango season, about the neighbor's cat, about the boy who brought a brass lamp and left with a grin I wish I'd seen on my own face years ago. I tell him about the tablet and the well and the wind that hums. I tell him I finally understand the sentence he carried like a quiet banner. A thing is not only what it is, but what it remembers. I ask him if a man can be repaired. The air moves. The brush keeps circling. Word travels. A mosque committee comes with a wooden minbar step split along the grain. We spread a cloth and lay it flat. The wood smells like sermons and winter. I brace the split with dowels cut from a fallen date branch. A simple, honest fix. No invisible glue, no trick. When we lift it, a man puts his palm on the patch and nods. It will show, he says. Good. We should see where it broke. That sentence sits with me all evening. I think about museums and glass. I think about how much effort we spend hiding the repair. Maybe we're not afraid of damage. Maybe we're afraid of proof that hands can heal it. At night, I return to the dunes. Not to bury anything, not to beg, to stand. The desert is a room without walls, a long-held breath. The wind is steady. It does not speak my name anymore. It speaks no name at all. That feels like mercy. I bring nothing but water and the small polishing cloth I found in my father's drawer. I press it into the sand and lift it. Watch the grains cling, then fall. I don't search for the tablet. If the desert wanted it back, it has it. If it gave it up again, that is no longer my decision to witness. Back in the city, a young woman arrives with a notebook of her grandmother's recipes, the paper brittle, the binding loose. She sets it on the counter like a newborn. It isn't art, she says, embarrassed. It's only food. I smile and tell her food is the first archive. We sew a cloth cover together while the glue cures. She reads one of the recipes aloud. Spiced milk with dates for fever. The words soften the room. When she leaves, she thanks me with a bag of bread still warm in its paper. I break it and eat with my fingers. Crumbs like a snowfall across the ledger. I don't sweep them. I sleep better. Not always, but enough. When dreams come, they are not trials. They are handwork. Threads, clamps, drying racks, sunlight across a table. Sometimes my father steps into the frame and adjusts a lamp. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. One afternoon, a package arrives without a return address. Inside is a photograph of a gallery room I know too well. The sandstone tablet isn't there. Its label shows only a gap between inventory numbers. Someone has written a line beneath it, in English. Returned to source. No signature. No proof. Perhaps it's a trick, or an accusation, or hope. My hands tremble. I set the photo in the window. Let the sun decide what to do with it. I visit the old port at dusk, where the sea rolls its quiet syllables against stone. Teenagers film each other for screens I don't understand. A man fixes a net. A woman haggles for lemons with a voice that could slice rope. The city hasn't changed as much as I thought. I was the one who left the frame. I sit on a bench and count the cargo ships, the way I did as a boy. Numbers used to mean profit. Now they mean weather. I know a sentence will arrive one day. Legal. Cold. Exact. Perhaps I will lose years, or the right to travel, or the few coins I've kept to pay rent. I do not welcome it, but I will not argue. A broken step is still a step. You walk on it differently, that's all. Before sleep, I open the ledger and add an entry that is not an object. Today, repaired the habit of hiding. It reads like a child's line. Clumsy but true. I close the book and place the cloth on top, the way my father used to close the day. If you ask me whether I am redeemed, I will say no. Redemption sounds like a door that locks from the outside. What I have is smaller and more faithful. A room I sweep each morning. A bench by the sea. A cloth that circles until the light changes. And the knowledge that some names belong to dust and should be left there. I am learning to live beside what I broke, not behind it. To let the repair show. To let the wind say nothing. To let memory keep what belongs to it. And, when permitted, to put a bowl back on the table and watch a family eat. That is my return. Not a cleansing, but a way of holding. Gentle, visible, unfinished. And when the desert hums, as deserts do, I answer with work.